I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
After Japan's military attacked the United States at Pearl Harbor, racial prejudice against Japanese Americans grew more intense, simply because they looked like the people who had bombed Pearl Harbor. General John DeWitt, the Western Defense Commander, felt that Japanese Americans, their parents and grandparents living along the West Coast, were somehow going to join in and help Japan's military attack the United States. The timing of General DeWitt's assumption, immediately after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, made it easy to convince government officials that all Japanese Americans and their families living within the exclusion zone on the west coast of the United States should be removed from their homes and forced to live in guarded internment camps. February 19, 1942, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, and within 3 months, Japanese Americans and their families living in the exclusion area were evacuated. Prior to this, they had been given the opportunity to move east, but the majority of them had nowhere else to go. The internment camps where they were to be sent were still under construction, which meant the evacuees were forced to live, some for several months, in what was called assembly centers. The assembly centers were nothing but racetrack stables, fairgrounds, and other public facilities where sanitation and living conditions were horrible. In the state of Washington, Puyallup, in Oregon, Portland, in California, Marysville, Sacramento, Stockton, Turlock, Merced, Tanforan, Salinas, Pinedale, Fresno, Tulare, Owens Valley, Pomona, Santa Anita. In Arizona, Parker Dam, and Mayer. Even though the barracks in the internment camps still weren't completely finished, Japanese Americans and their families were moved out of the assembly centers, packed into trains and trucks, treated like animals, and taken to their final destination, one of 10 internment camps located in 7 states from California to Arkansas. Tule Lake in the state of California, Minidoka in Idaho, Hart Mountain in Wyoming, Topaz in Utah, Manzanar in California, Granada in Colorado, Poston in Arizona, Gila River in Arizona, Rower in Arkansas, Jerome in Arkansas. The internment camps were made of hundreds of barracks divided into blocks of 14. Each block had a mess hall, recreation hall, 2 latrines, and 2 shower areas. The barracks were scantily built of pine planking and tar paper. 6 families were assigned to a barrack, which meant that several family members would be living in a space no larger than 20 by 25 feet. These 10 internment camps became the forced residence for over 112,000 Japanese Americans and their families. There were numerous other smaller facilities that held community leaders, husbands, fathers, uncles, sons, grandfathers, that had been rounded up immediately after Pearl Harbor was bombed. For many of these men, it would be months, even years, before they would be reunited with their families in the internment camp.
We had a room 20 by 25 feet in one barrack. We were in one room, and my brother and my cousins in the next room. The walls of the barrack were like these, where they just went up just so far. They did not reach the roof, and so there was space between the wall, the partition, and the roof. Throughout every barrack, people could hear babies cry. They could hear kids who argued. There was no privacy in the rooms. Between the cots here shows that there is a porta potty basically, and chamber pot is what it was. And so that was one of my jobs, to carry our chamber pot after we all used it, to take it to the latrines to empty.
We were given these canvas bags. Later on, some of the soldiers told us they were body bags, but we didn't know that. We had to go out into the field and fill them with hay and straw. Now, I had asthma and hay fever, so that was not very comfortable. I wheezed and itched and carried on, sneezed all the time.
The only thing that I always remember back is that we would be playing outside, the kids, and they'd have these terrible, terrible dust storms where it would just pelt your skin, and then you couldn't open your eyes to see where you were going, so we didn't even know where our barrack was or anything. I just have flashes of memories like that.
When we realized what the camp setup was going to be about, my father said, okay, let's take a walk around and see what the whole thing is all about. And it was only because he oriented us to where the mess hall was, where we had to stand in line with our meal tickets that had to be punched, so forth, that you gradually understand that there's an order to this life.
Once the internees had moved into the camps, it became clear to the adults that it was up to them to make the best of their situation. In the Japanese culture, this is called gaman, enduring what seems unbearable, with patience and dignity. As a result, they held elections to select block leaders who would represent their concerns to camp administrators and would see that there was a degree of safety and regularity within the camp proper. The internees built schools, had sporting and recreational clubs, created magnificent art, staffed mess halls and clinics, and established police and fire departments within each camp. The adults worked hard to create a feeling of normalcy, especially for the children who now lived in a place surrounded by barbed wire fences and armed guards. Once government administrators were confident the internees were both productive and orderly, they gave them permission to purchase items for themselves from the Montgomery Ward and Sears catalog.
Every camp was a community, and we had our newspapers. Every camp had its newspaper, and of course that tells everybody what's going on, as well as telling people that they could try to be on the council. So in addition to having my own club, we also had a Girl Scout troop. And of course, we didn't have a sewing machine there, and so we ordered everything, including my Girl Scout uniform, from our catalogs. We had a Sears Roebuck and Montgomery Ward's catalog. My mother worked in the mess hall. She received $12 a month. That was her pay every month. And my father got $16 a month. And even if you were the greatest brain surgeon in the world and you were an internee, you would have gotten $19 a month. And our pay, I have been told, was based on the pay of the buck private. We're not supposed to get more than the buck private.
I remember how everybody assembled in the mornings, and we raised the American flag and pledged allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. It's kind of ironic that we had been imprisoned basically by our own country, and then we still felt loyal to the United States, and we pledged allegiance to our flag. Things I remember there, watching baseball, because the camp would form teams basically by area. So we had a Florin team, maybe a Lodi team, etc. Baseball was a very active sport. And then we watched movies on the side of a mountain. So I've always been a big movie fan, and I think I even enjoyed watching it outside on the side of a mountain.
Is that we'd see these cowboy and Indian movies, and we'd say, the Indians are going to come save us and we're going to get out of the camp. And years later, when I saw how powerless they were, I said, see, isn't that how a child is? You think someone's going to come save you, but they had no power to do anything like that.
I didn't want other people to say, oh, the Japanese had a good time in camp, because that was not true. Because for my sisters, the teenagers, the toilet situation, initially there were no partitions between the toilets, and the shower was a group shower. My sister said that they would wait until late in the night to go, just so that they wouldn't have to shower with everyone else.
On April 28, 1942, General John DeWitt sent orders that all orphaned children who had even one drop of Japanese blood in them were to be sent to the Manzanar internment camp. The 105 orphan children that were to be evacuated from the exclusion area were from the Shonian Japanese orphanage, the Japanese Salvation Army Home, and the Maryknoll Catholic Home for Japanese Children. Lillian and Henry Matsumoto, then acting directors of the Shonin Japanese Orphanage, pleaded that the children would not be a threat to national security. Their pleas were denied. However, the Matsumotos were able to convince government officials they would need separate buildings, other than the barracks, in order to properly care for the children, ranging from age 3 months to 17 years. The orphanage at Manzanar was called the Children's Village, and the Matsumotos dedicated their lives to the service of the orphaned children under their care.
The happiest time at Manzanar was knowing that I could play with the children and that they were safe while they were there.
By the time World War II ended in 1945, Japanese Americans who were removed from their homes on the West Coast had now lived in internment camp for 3.5 years. Over the course of their internment, Japanese Americans had assumed responsibility for maintaining their lives, their families, and their culture. During that 3.5-year period, internees were staffing camp operations, running printing presses, post offices, publishing camp newspapers, running machines and welding shops, shoe repair shops, and other camp community facilities. And because of their knowledge, skills, and patience as farmers, the Japanese American internees were able to develop vibrant, productive farm systems out of the arid desert lands where their camps were located. In February 1943, the U.S. government issued a loyalty questionnaire designed to identify Japanese American men whom they could draft into the military. Questions 27 and 28 had a devastating effect on Japanese American men and their families.
Question 28 was worse. If you were an immigrant from Japan in the 1930s, 40s, you could not be allowed to be a citizen. And question 28 asked for your complete loyalty to the United States and to give up any loyalty or citizenship to Japan. Okay, so if you were an Issei, an immigrant from Japan, not allowed citizenship in the United States, and you gave up that citizenship to Japan, you had no citizenship of any country.
So Japanese Americans suffered a great deal from having been put into the camps. We lost financially, we lost our freedom. I think we lost a certain amount of self-dignity or self-respect. Because you think about it, if your own country has imprisoned you, maybe some of the people had doubts about, gee, are we as good as other citizens too? So I think that had some kind of a effect psychologically on Japanese Americans.
Many internees living today still carry with them the personal burdens of racial prejudice and the injustice of betrayal from the country they loved.